Elmer. Elmer, calling Elmer. Come in, Elmer, the spirit of Elmer Gantry. Can you hear me? Come. Be sure and cut that out of the tape now. Okay? All right. The lecture was titled, Why People Don't Want to Associate with Mystics. And the speaker opened with this comment, because they don't want to look bad. And someone in the audience immediately responded, hey, how about because they smell bad? And another voice joined in, yeah, and how about because they always live too far out of town and don't seem all that friendly anyway? Yeah, how about all that, they cried. And the lecturer gave up. How about you? In the beginning is a train that everybody rides, and it goes straight. Then a few find tracks anew and keep it to themselves. The skin of a planet does not peel except under a watchful eye. There's no need to push and shove if you're not going anywhere. As the prince left for the mythical crusades, the king offered him this last advice. Never lend your mind to others, especially a crowd. According to one account, life initially agreed to let man live 60 years if they'd agreed to mentally die at 20. What a deal. It'll make you squeal. Shoot me with a book, quick, Lucille. As he pondered how dichotomously driven man is wont to conceive of any individual progress as either being exclusively through the body or the mind, one guy whistled this little verse as he further reflected on where one might be if this belief were carried to its ultimate extreme. Whistled he. Your genitalia's gonna nail you if first your mind don't drive you blind. A man told a mystic, you make me laugh. And the mystic replied, I'm sorry. The problem with picking just one thing and sticking to it is that, one, it is not a problem, and two, that it might be. The more conscious take no prisoners for two reasons. They don't want any, they can't find any, and there aren't any. Further ways to securely determine whether or not you are still residing in areas less than fully civilized and developed, yet still in the process. The people love gory stories and still dream dreams of gods. According to one version, the first thing they teach on the first day of the mystic's first grade class is that whatever it is that everyone else is believing and thinking, forget it. What could be simpler? What could be more too simple? Some more sound advice for when you find yourself in the city. Never answer when they call your name. If they don't refund postage and handling, they can forcefully assure you that with their full guarantee, you have nothing to lose by ordering now. A trick the hucksters picked up from life. Things to absolutely count on. Anyone who gives advice on how others should live won't take it. And the everybody knows that choir don their robes and begin to sing, everybody knows that, and we suggest you not waste your time in pointing out that which is obvious to everyone. Thank you, choir. There was once a man who made up a list of all the things he thought toxic to human existence, but no one would listen to him. So, he then claimed that the gods gave him the list, and although no one still believed in it, at least they then listened. What more could a poor boy want? There is a certain story that gives another picture of our local creation and line of development. First the void, then a particle, then a planet, then the universe, then the super void. The logic and topography of city mental life. Sequence is only of importance if you're not going anywhere. Blues song update. Oh, there's two. Two trains are running. And a third one on the way, yay. Mama. A man, I had lived that. Think I'm not capable of a little, you know, that's fine, that non-written stuff, you know. Smart stuff. A man asked a mystic, "What's the greatest danger in your kind of activity?" And the mystic replied, thinking it's too big a deal. And the man seemed moved and said, well, thank you. That somehow makes me feel much better. And under his breath, the mystic muttered, "Damn fool." Then both of them went back to being just the mystic. As the prince left to go upstairs, his father said to him, "Remember, a man who will wet his bed will wet yours also." Some good news. You're beginning to neurally expand beyond the confines of literal thinking when the distinction between same as and different than becomes less and less distinguishable or pertinent to your remapping of reality. The mystical traditions and American bandstand. Trying to promote someone else's ideas is like a really bad lip sync. If you're in the city and look at things just so, there's always somebody at fault. The alert homeowner and the matter of exposed faucets. No matter the weather, the mystically minded can turn it on and off at will. Yeah. Another view, even at cruder levels, 'tis a sorry athlete who can compete only when he feels good. You can fake a headache, maybe an orgasm, even the IRS, but when it comes to the really important stuff, you better leave that to the experts. A man once told a mystic, "You make me laugh." And the mystic replied, "That is not what I intend." The curious case of the man who said, "I hate everything about life," and local conditions, trying to get on his good side, added, "At least you don't play favorites." As the prince went off to join the mythical explorers, his father offered him this parting advice: never settle in a land where originality is not held in supreme regard. In that reality is not linear and literal thought is, anything it thinks regarding the former is perforce in part always misleading. Thus, metaphorical thinking can be seen as a kind of running adjustment thereof. Old things defined anew. A place becomes super civilized if they stop publishing obituaries. A man so when he no longer notes them. One guy snarled, "Nobody pushes me around," and Life said, "Who you talking to?" And he cooed, "Well, certainly not you." And one fine day, Life pondered, "How come nobody ever tells me that I make them laugh?" And now an alternative view. As the smithy's son headed off for another night on the town, his father said, "Don't forget, my boy, wallow in it." One continuing advantage to living in the city is that reminders to be dense and dazed are not really necessary. One man one day thought, if there is not another reality running alongside or through this one, then there couldn't continue to be always new things to discover. And if that be so, which it surely must be, then there must be a style of awareness reflective thereof. One fable has it that life originally offered man a choice, that reality would remain constant and his perception change, or the other way around. Okay, guys, who voted for which? Another hint that you might be becoming a bit more conscious is when mentally the only thing that doesn't bore you is you. How things come apart. How things come about, part 78. Men with faulty memories conjure up gods to fill in the blank spaces. A certain legend says that from the very beginning, those in the mystical tradition were not concerned with the hiding of some secret knowledge, but rather were charged with the responsibility of preserving man's genetic memory bank. The diagnostician said to his assistant, "If it weren't for gravity, many people would still be alive." And the underling replied, "Do you mean the pull downward or seriousness?" "Oh, nurse, check, please." An insider's tip to a mystic's library habits. A book laid out, good as one read. It is reputed that there are still those who find it difficult to pinpoint the similarity between man's mind and stuff it's written down. Did I say similarity when you thought I'd say synonymity? Next week's guest speaker is the author of the bestseller, They Shoot Manuscripts, Don't They? Not out of my head, they don't. One history of it holds that the very first mystical approach was to simply take all that was presently believed, known, and suspected and go in any other direction. Tell me, Gladys, how did we get so far off the track? One of what might be considered a side benefit, one of what some may consider a side benefit of being original, is that the original can't be killed. A man asked a mystic, "Why would I want to live forever?" And the mystic said, "Sometimes you make me laugh." A man told his son, "If those in the city ever pronounce you to be sane, solid, and fit, run for your friggin' life." A man told a mystic, "In a strange way, you entertain me." And the mystic replied, "We're getting closer." Still, believe it or not, I do. On the subject that you were so kind to make up, and I have been so kind as to continue to expatiate on, while breaking no local moral ordinances, of going from literal thinking to metaphorical thinking to symbolic thinking. And those of you who have been here at the track faithfully know that it's been at least 8 to 6 days in tapings when I have been talking about metaphorical thinking, while promising at any moment, the very next show, to move on to symbolic thinking. I was doing so last time. In fact, I opened the last program, if you recall, swearing almost, figuratively speaking, that would be the night. Turns out, right down to the last 1 or 2 minutes of it, I was pointing out that we weren't going to make it, and it would do it next time. That was the alternative ending to last time, because what you started to receive was right at the end for me to say, well, here it is, and after spending 58 minutes with what appeared to be, or what was promised to be, a preface to symbolic thinking, which I was going to get to, and now it's obvious I'm not going to, then let me point out, nay, what I have been doing for the last 8 to 6 nights, promising to talk about symbolic thinking, was it? But kind-hearted reincarnation of Elmer Gantry, if not Albert Schweitzer, moved me not to do that. I waited until now to do it. I still don't know whether to leave it at that, because it's problematic how much you people get out of having to think, wait a minute. So threatening, so while talking about metaphorical thinking, which even though it was non-linear, as I pointed out, but the way in which I presented it does seem to be a form of progress to go from literal thinking to metaphorical. And then you would think, and you're correct, that well, whatever I was going to intend by symbolic would be somewhere expanded, somewhere better than, or greater than, more nourishing than metaphorical. But there it was, 6 to 8 nights. I kept threatening to, never got around to it, but never forgot it. Would always at the end say, well, next time. What if last time I had said, okay, instead of telling you next time, let me point out the last 6 to 8 nights have been an example of symbolic thinking, of telling you that I was about to do it, and I never did it. But as I said, that I don't know whether that's unfair or too fair. It's certainly not Vanity Fair. Thank you, Mr. Bunyan. We don't have to pay royalties on anything that old anyway. We'll leave that up in the air as to whether I'm going to do more with the symbolic part. I probably will. But let me point out from last time, let me go this far and point out that it's a very insecure border between what I refer to as metaphorical thinking and symbolic. So rather than me continue to say, well, I'll get to it in a minute or next time, just consider we have sort of skated over the line, and I have kind of driven over the rose bushes on your side of the driveway. So just keep that in mind if possible. I wanted to pick out something. It still sounds like I'm talking about metaphorical for a few minutes. Last time, for instance, I don't usually go back and talk about anything specific insofar as dissecting these things that we laughingly refer to as the news items I read first. But there was one about in the midst of having to do with thinking and moving to new places and people saying, God, I'm sick of thinking the same thing. And the whole idea that I was going to take the idea of literal, metaphorical, and symbolic thinking into the land of originality of thought as a kind of metaphysical discipline and method. So all of this has been sort of laying out groundwork, as always, and throwing out bits and pieces. And so last time, in the midst of all that, if you recall, there was one that went something about a certain tabby, when left out in the cold alone, would, to gain the warmth and comfort, the comfort of some warmth, would go sit on the hood of caddies, never Porsches. Cadillacs, never Porsches. I did it because, if you recall, last time we were here, we were taping it here in the United States. If we'd been back, if we'd been back in Oslo, I would have said always go sits on Volvos and never BMWs. All right, so I assume that now that I've done that, you see that the point was, or one of the points, but the point I'm going to bring out then was the cat could represent a man's mind. When a man's mind left out in the cold, suddenly you find yourself, for whatever reason, sort of discombobulated, somewhat in a position of being uncomfortable with whatever's going on in your mind's reaction to some situation, and it's like you're not sure, just that little momentary of, I'm not sure where to stand or what to think. Tabby, representing the mind, will always go to seek that kind of comfort and familiarity. Will go sit on a Cadillac's hood outside in the carport somewhere. We'll go find a Cadillac hood rather than a Porsche hood. That is, it will find something, a place of familiarity. It's what gives it the warmth that it needs. If it's been out, see, being out alone in the cold is like the mind. Suddenly somebody turns to you and goes, blah, 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 or ask you a question, and you're, for whatever reason, you realize, I got no idea what they're talking about. I got no response to that. Or you said something, somebody says, well, wait a minute, how about so-and-so? And they give you a response that's such that sort of staggers you, and you're rendered speechless, almost thoughtless, like, wait a minute, that interferes with what I normally think. It was almost like somebody brought up a metaphorical translation of something you said, and it kind of throws you off. The cat will run, not to a foreign place, because it already feels like it's out in the cold alone. Like, what's happened? I've been thrown out of the house, and it will run to the Cadillac. If we're, like I said, we were filming in the United States last time. It will run to a Cadillac, some American-made car, still speaking allegorically, as opposed to a foreign place, because it already feels like it's out of whack. You understand? Now the question could be, assuming that now that makes some allegorical sense, is then a person could ask, well, if that's the point, why don't you just say that? That when the mind is kind of thrown off or presented with something out of the ordinary, that it will, rather than pursue it, it will immediately want to run and sit somewhere, find a place where it normally feels. Why don't you just say that? I certainly could have. I just did. But you understand, metaphorical, allegorical thinking, it's the same thing, in speech. The thing is, if it's done knowingly, which I did it knowingly, and you are attempting to do something other than just be a passive listener to this, it requires that you participate. You understand? It sounds, once I took it apart, not bragging on that particular example, but I read them all fast, and I remember last time many people, the bottom of a page was part of another one, to say a certain tabby, when left out in the cold alone, would always seek out to sit on Cadillacs, not Porsches. I even had it faster than the version I just gave you. And I noticed it didn't get much, and I'm not all that surprised. It's no insult to you, because many of these, I know, just go, and you think, what the hell is a cat got sitting on a car? But then when I explain it, you can go, well, why do you say that? If you just say, well, when the mind feels ill at ease, it will always is inclined to resort back to its old thought patterns rather than some kind of new one, rather than try to make some new sense out of it. Why do you say that? Well, Jesus. All your life people's been just saying that. I don't mean just that, but anything. Let me give you we'll pretend that you got something out of that. And we'll take a sort of a little side step like we're between dancers and sing over in the corner. How about the curious situation of men, let's take religion, again being just the easiest and most visible example. Men, and I guess you should read priests, rabbis, all sorts of would-be spiritual men. But them giving, for instance, they're giving literal translations right this second throughout history. Just for instance, of the words of Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, Buddha. Think about it right this second. Of course, the experience of most of you people here in the United States, let's say Jesus, Christianity, that there are people all over, wherever they're having church services of any stripe right now. The guy, as part of the, as I point out, of having a holy writ is so that you don't have to hunt for material. You don't have to think. Somebody, somewhere, right this second, thousands of people probably, right this second, are giving literal translations of, they're reading something, they're saying, well, here's what Jesus said about so-and-so, and they'll pull out one that Jesus, what would be one? I believe I'm attributing to the right source, that it would be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle and a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And of course, you enter into a higher state of consciousness, it should read. And so there's somebody just pointing out, you know, there's a parable. Now don't get lost, I know I'm taking a few seconds here. It's tied to what I was telling you. Think about, I call it this curious situation. And we're not making fun of religion, as you know, and we'll assume there are people somewhere sitting there, maybe even taking notes, reading their Bible, and a minister, a priest, a rabbi says, all right, let's turn to where Jesus, you know, and they might read along. All right, Jesus said it'll be easier for a rich man, or for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to reach a higher state of consciousness. And everybody goes, yeah. And then he'll start saying, well, what it is in life, that if you get all tied up with trying to pursue worldly goods, which are temporal, they're going to rot, you can lose them, that if all you're worried about is getting rich here in this life, you're doomed. I mean, for no other reason, you'll be so concerned about holding on to all you got, you won't be charitable, you won't give to the temple, you won't give any money to the church, you just spend all your time worried about that. And people go, oh, you know, because you can't deny that. But here's the curious situation. Now listen, because it has to do with you and your own thought process. Here it is, those people, we assume they're just as serious and sincere giving this lesson, and people out there, they showed up for church, they come there, they pay money, they contribute to keep it going, and they listen for the minister. Whatever his credentials, they assume that he knows something. He gives them a literal translation of words that were originally themselves allegorical. I want you to let me do it again. The curious situation that there are people now in ways that apparently aspire to be metaphysical, aspire to be of a higher nature, which religion on the surface aspires to be, and there's a man there standing, a contemporary man, that the flock, his constituency, they are looking to him for the leadership, the understanding that he must be of a higher development or greater understanding, more in touch with the cosmos and the spirits and etc. He is standing there giving them, and I'm taking notes, and out of his understanding, out of his higher development, he's giving them a literal translation of words originally spoken as allegory. Come on, at least do that. Make me think that you're working on it. Go. That gives a whole new brightness to the term curious situation. I'd be inclined to stay here until everybody just either sees something or just has to pass out. Well, let me try to just a slightly different telling of it, because I'm going to get to what it has to do with you personally inside the privacy of your own nomenclature. Everything that passes for being of some metaphysical, of some mystical nature in life that's publicly available wherever you go, and it does not have to, obviously, certainly does not have to be limited to churches, temples, organized mainstream religion. Nay, nay. You could find a local charismatic cult leader. You could find some man teaching a revised edition, some sectarian version of some mainstream religion, saying that he has secret knowledge, secret insight, whatever it is. And whatever they're doing, there's no exception to this, unless you find somebody that really knows what they're doing. And then, of course, they're writing their own material, and you listen to it, and you go, Jesus, that's too weird. I never heard anything like that. So that takes care of that. But everything else, if you listen to it, again, I'm saying outside of even mainstream religion, and it can be outside the major religious so-called prophets of Jesus, Muhammad, and their ilk. It can be minor yogis and Zen masters and past awakened great teachers and whatever title they're given. And you have a man standing nowadays, and you have a group of people. You have him leading the dance, and you have some people in the audience, followers, people wanting to learn. I don't mean followers with any particular disrespect to the people's intelligence, but they know that they're hungry for something, and here's a man that seems to know something. But what is it that all of these teachers are doing, besides already slipped it in on you? It's like a really bad lip sync, which I assume everybody gets that. Of course, you've got to be somewhat of a real music lover, and I guess kind of finicky. Don't you remember, didn't you ever watch American Bandstand or Soul Train or whatever the latest would be? And there's a record you like or an artist you like, and they say, and here he is, and they bring him out, and if you got any sense, you immediately suspect something. He comes out alone, and you've heard the record. The record, was at least his 10-piece backup band normally, and there could have been a string section and voices, or perhaps he comes out with 2 or 3 musicians, and the electric guitars have no chords on them, the bass. At any rate, anyway, here's the artist, and they say, here he is, and you're just all excited to see him. You've never seen him, or you wanted to see him, and they start. And he starts opening strings and really getting, and you're just all excited, and suddenly. And no matter how good they do it, again, if some of you got any musical ability, that's all I can tell you, you cannot fake lip sync any more than you can fake the best actors in the world singing the piano. I don't care whether they're playing Mozart's part of Mozart or Thelonious Monk. You still cannot fake it if you can recognize it. So now think about my little off-step there in case you thought the one about mystical traditions and American Bandstand had no pertinence. And if you thought that, then just shame upon you. If you can sit in a certain way, everybody trying to teach somebody else's methods, somebody else's ideas, and I don't care how great they are. I mean, if we just picked out, if you said, well, I think, and you just name somebody, I think Lyle was the greatest mind that ever lived, the greatest mystical teacher that ever lived. And if I said, okay, I agree. I mean, if we just agreed on that. And then somebody says, well, here is the world's. He is considered by all the great Taoist, if there was such an organized group. He is considered the living master of that. Okay, fine. And it doesn't matter who he is. It doesn't matter how great it doesn't matter what kind of intellect, no matter how glib he is, no matter how charismatic, no matter how likable. If you got any ability to hear on another level, to think on another level, teaching somebody else, promoting somebody else's ideas, no matter how great the ideas are at best, and worse, which is the same thing. Remember the distinction between same as and different than? It is a really bad, I mean, makes you want to turn away, lip sync. It just will not work. Not with a few. and the few's not a lot, but there's a few people that it's all a bad lip sync. Back to, a person could say, well, the idea that you gave the cat and the hoods of Cadillacs and Porsches, why don't you just come out and say what you meant? All of your life, everybody's been exposed, in a sense, to what you wanted to hear. A cheap way of putting this, the kind of secret knowledge that almost every would-be mystic starts out believing exists, that they believe that what is bothering them, what is lacking in everything they've read, what it is, where it is that they itch that they can't quite scratch, and then they hear it, or they read it somewhere, that it's secret knowledge somewhere. That seems to be correct. It strikes everyone as being true. But on that basis, now you understand, I'm not telling you this literally because it's not true, but on that basis, if there was a secret, like this one little secret sentence or an idea that should produce awakening, that should enlighten one's consciousness to a whole new level, that should cure, that should present to you that which you seek, if there was such a thing, you've heard it. Now, there's not, but you've heard it. So how come you didn't recognize it? Because it was a bad lip sync. Well, last time I also tried to slip in on you that said, how can you identify people who do not know what they're talking about? There's a sure way that they will insist to you that it's important that you know that it's important that you know. I mean, they could be there out of the goodness of their heart. They're only there to help their fellow man, whatever they're. But they say it's important for you to know what it is that they are talking about. That's how you know that they don't know what they're talking about. Because if you know what you're talking about, you know it's not important to them. That is the real use among a few people of allegory, of metaphorical speech and thinking, because it forces you, if you're going to get anything out of it, to participate. Assuming that you, again, that you're not simply a passive audience member. That if you, I know it's not possible, but if you tried to take, since you're showing up here and people tuning in and right to the show here and to me, if they're trying to take it seriously, then let's assume that until proven otherwise, that perhaps they try to take everything I say that could potentially be of some benefit. And so then you hear something about, when left out in the cold, alone in the cold, a certain tabby always seeks out caddies and never Porsches. And then I explain what I meant, which is easy to see once I explain it. I've talked about it enough. And then you go, well, why don't you just say that? Now go back, you can do it yourself. I'm not going to make up the potential sequence of events that could occur, but just you can sense it yourself that if you happen to have heard what I said and it struck you in some way and you remember the story enough that you went away, or it could have happened pretty quickly, and that you came up with some version. It don't have to be my exact words, but you came up with something out of it yourself. Do you understand it required that you do something approaching original thinking? I don't mean that just because you agreed with me. That's not the point. But that if you did take the story of just a few lines, or the one line, it was just one sentence, that when left out alone in the cold, one tabby always sold out Cadillacs, never Porsches. And that in some way you put it together, that you got something out of it. You understand it would require something resembling original thought, because that is, so obscure, so apparently non-sequitarian. Don't write me. So nutso. The sentence makes sense. You understand. When left out alone in the cold, one tabby always set out caddies, not Porsches. I mean, the sentence makes sense if you understood everything I said when I first read it. You go, well, yeah, but what the hell? What's the point of that? Even if you figured out, well, sit on caddies, well, maybe it's animals, cats will get up on, seek the warmth. Maybe you started all that, and you thought, well, why caddies? And then you figure, well, it means Cadillac. Why Cadillacs instead of Porsches? There's a better car. Well, what the hell would that be? And then you finally figure out, well, that means since we were, as you recall, last time we were in the United States when we were doing this, last Wednesday, that, if the cat represents something else, which it surely does, then if it was a man's thoughts, it was the way he just this thinking process, then would seek something more familiar. That would not go seek out something, even though it could, in theory, the cat go, boy, there's nothing as sharp as a Porsche. Except when it's suddenly in the cold and unfamiliar territory, it will seek out a caddy. And so let's assume that you got something resembling that you got something. There is nothing in ordinary experience, there's nothing in the normal flow of intellectual traffic. You know I'm not bragging about this, but it was so far afield that just hearing it, you can't go, oh, well, that has to do with what the Republicans are now trying to do in Congress. Or this, oh, I understand what that meant. That was a reference to the problems that the Italian Prime Minister is now having with the revived apparent energy of the Socialist Party there. When left out in the cold alone, one tabby always sought out caddies, never Porsches. Again, assuming that you are not yourself some strange intellectual mental breed, that you went off on something strange, absolutely unprofitable. You do, I assume, catch what I'm saying. If you took that one sentence and for some reason you thought, well, he must mean something, and sometimes I get something out, so I'll try to think, what the hell does it mean? There is nothing readily available. There's no other allegories. There's no literal news. There's no philosophical statement. There's no axiom. There's no proverb that comes to mind that makes you want to go, that means is love your neighbor as yourself. You know? All that means is what comes around goes around. All that means is we need a level playing. There's no common cliche that immediately brings that into any sort of light that gives it a better sense of logic. If you got something out of it, you had to work with it. You had to participate. It's not as a contest. It's not that, you don't understand this, but it's not that you finally got and went, and you rushed to me, and I went, good boy. That's it exactly. You know that's not it. Because whatever you came up with wouldn't be exactly what my translation was, but that's not the point. By the by, may I slip into you again, the curious case of people apparently teaching great words, doing literal translations of things that were originally said metaphorically and allegorically. You remember that one? Now back to what we were. You begin to see, that is, the very things that could assist someone on the kind of intellectual track headed in some way to another level of consciousness. But if the mind is the way to approach it, then there is nothing going on publicly, there's nothing commonly available that is actually metaphorical in nature, and that which apparently was metaphorical to begin with, the way that people generally will abide it, will tolerate it, will seek it out, is to have someone translate it. Well, I already warned you, I'm tempted to stay on that one. All right, can you see right quick? I'll go ahead and do it. I'll refrain, but you've had a few minutes. From one view, it's still really not spatial, it's certainly not linear, but can you see that that is almost the opposite? That if there was some common knowledge available, if there was such thing as public mystical teachers, or et cetera, if religions or the so-called known mystical traditions, if they were actually as purported, they would not be giving literal translations of what was going on. They themselves would be giving allegorical. That would be the other way around. You understand? That's not literally true, but that would be closer to something profitable than what they're doing now. But try and get an ordinary person, somebody pursuing, or just an ordinary religious person that takes their religion seriously, or somebody who believes they are indeed involved with some contemporary mystical activity. It will always be based upon something that's gone before. It will always be that they're saying, well, we are the latest in the line of some particular Sufi school or some Zen school, some Jewish mystical tradition. We can now trace it to right here, and here we have Rabbi so-and-so giving us the translation of what was originally meant. Assuming, again, almost all of them, by the way, are based, that there is some lineage, that it all comes from the one source, life itself. And so it's not that people can just suddenly jump up and come up with a whole new mystical tradition. That's why they have to lean on somebody else. But you understand, for them to say, all right, now we have Rabbi so-and-so or Guru so-and-so or Yogi so-and-so, it's a good thing you're here. You're lucky to be alive in the same time that he is, because he is here. Will you go ahead and do it? He'll come out. He'll say, well, here are the secret writings of Abraham, of Muhammad, or here's what Buddha wrote and didn't let him publish, or whatever it is. And he'll read it, and it will sound like, to start with, when left out in the cold alone, a certain tabby would jump in. That, or it is easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. Wait a minute, wait. That's almost, some of you are probably used to it, that's almost as strange as me saying, when left out in the cold alone, a tabby would always seek out Cadillac, caddies never Porsches. When it starts off and said, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Let's just stop in the middle of a sentence. What if it was the first time you ever heard that and you thought, well, no, a camel to go through the eye of a needle? Maybe he saw the kind of disturbed look on your little cat face and went, no, no, no. And he went, hold it, let me finish. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter, to achieve a higher state of consciousness. And of course, well, I didn't do it for you, but I assume you can see a rich man, you can look at as being an intellectual. It's the same thing that instead of now a rich man entering into a higher state of consciousness, it would be easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than it would for a cat, when left out cold alone, to seek out a Porsche instead of a caddy. That is, when you're rich with familiarity of your own thinking, you can't move. You can't become more conscious, because every time you're almost, shook up a little bit, or if a Muhammad or the spirit of Elmer Gantry did come down and give you some kind of nudge, and like you were thinking just some ordinary thought, and he suddenly gave you a nudge, and you suddenly, it was like you found yourself temporarily, just momentarily out in the cold alone. If you're a rich man, you won't stay out in the cold alone long, because if you're a rich man, you've got plenty of intellectual, familiar, warm hoods of your own Cadillac or Chevrolet or Pontiac to go sit on. You can immediately go, oh. Now, you had me there for a minute, but hey, wait a minute, I got to come back for that. If you're talking to somebody else, and if not, what I was going to get to finally is in here is what you do anyway. So what I was saying was almost the opposite. And so if it was the first time you heard the man was giving supposedly a contemporary view and translation from the great Christian Judaic mystical tradition, and he's using the words of Jesus. Again, I say, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into or achieve a higher state of consciousness. And me giving you one, the heart of that kind of allegory, is that what it means is you can't reach a higher state of consciousness if you're a rich man, but it's not talking about wealth, it's not talking about anything external, it's talking about in here that you're so full of, you're so familiar with, you're so greedy, you're so clutching, which is, all that's just words, you're just normal. It's not an attack. That is, you're a rich man that, wait a minute, I can think, I'm an intelligent person, and suddenly you hear some idea that's really almost from another level, from an obscure view of reality, and it almost throws you off like, a cat out in the cold, suddenly thrown out the door. But if you're a rich man, you can stay sane, you can stay warm. But not a rich man with possessions. It's up here you've got to be, all it amounts to is sane. That you can be kind of shook up, and it could be not just an obscure question, it's just the kind of being a rich man that something terrible happens in life. One of your close friends, a family member dies, something horrible happens in your life. But if you're a rich man, in a sense, you can bounce back. But you're rich up here, that is, you have the necessary mechanical, genetically intrinsic wealth up here. We're using wealth now allegorically, because to a would-be mystic, it's not wealth. It's just, well, it's irrelevant. But if you got that kind of wealth, then you can always bounce back, which is another way of saying what? You can always manage, by God, never to get more conscious. And yeah, you were frightened. You was afraid, well, wait a minute, if I keep listening to all this weird crap you talk about, or I keep thinking weird thoughts, what if I suddenly become more conscious and don't like it? Hey. Life looks after its own. Yes, sirree. Damn little chance. But back to what I was saying, as you can see, it is almost things run in reverse, almost, that you would go to hear what was promoted to be a living, contemporary version of the great mystical traditions, etc. And back to what I was doing, this guy walks out, and they say, how lucky you are, and he gives you the translation of Jesus' words, of the thing about the rich man. Except he doesn't do what I just told you. He gives a literal translation of that which was originally said as allegory. I got to do it again. Even with talk loud. Think about it. That you go somewhere seeking some sort of higher knowledge, some sort of expanded understanding. In the very places you go, think about it. It comes close. There's very few things, there's really nothing in life that's actually ass backwards. But by God, this is close. You can take my word for it. That you go there for a kind of direction in a mystical, well, for help and direction in a mystical direction. And they take words that you already would assume, or they say, all right, here it is. The guy says, hey, I'm not some Johnny-come-lately. I didn't just show up. I'm not an ex-con man who's been rehabilitated through an outreach program at the prison. I'm involved with this. I've studied all my life. And he gives you some quick credentials. And he says, as a matter of fact, I base my teaching on, and he come up with something. As I said, this always has a lineage in some way, if it's out and publicly known. They could be Buddha's words or whatever, and you go, this is it. I just knew that Buddha had the right idea, or Jesus, or whatever it is, or the Sufis did. And you go, and they give him a little build up that here he is, a living, the current link in this unending chain of the great Sufi secret tradition. And so he comes here and he says, all right, now, I'm going to give you, and let's say that you already had become enamored of Sufism through books and the idea. So he says, all right, let's turn to such and such page in the Quran, and let me read you the words of Blessed Muhammad. And he reads one, an allegory, like the eye of camel, eye of going through the eye of a needle. And you go, oh, God. All the years I've been reading and trying to, and now I found a man. And it all seems right. The right crowd, the right meeting place, and the man seems, and he reads the words, and you wait. Here he is. He's going to speak. Not just the words on the page, as much as they may have struck you throughout the years, and you're just sure that Muhammad or the Sufi tradition was it. Here it is, a living Sufi. And he says, all right. Maybe he closes the book. He says, now. And you're ready, because here it is, a living person with his own understanding. Obviously superior to yours, or else why you sitting out there and he's up on the stage. And he begins to give you a translation, a modern, a living explanation of it. And what is never noticed, though, that comes dangerous, comes beautifully close to being the one example, perhaps, of ass backwards on this planet in a 3D reality, is he begins giving you a literal translation of something that was originally said allegorically. Now into the privacy of your own gourd. Why, for example, did I not just simply say, instead of the caddy, the tabby being out in the cold alone, seeking out the warm comfort of hoods of caddies and not Porsches, why didn't I just say the mind when it all disturbed, when it all uncomfortable, when it all sort of at loose ends, at 6s and 7s or 10s and 14s, will always immediately just run back to where it feels comfortable. It will run back to normal, local, familiar territory. Certainly it's not going to go to something even more foreign, because it already feels like I'm in foreign, or at least I'm in alien, unknown territory. Suddenly I don't know where I am. I can't think. Wait a minute, wait. Which, of course, one of the benefits also, to be off the point for a second, of being a follower, of saying, well, yes, I'm a Jew, or yes, I'm a Christian, because if all else, and somebody says, you're discussing things, and a guy brings up some point, let's say, and suddenly you don't know what to say, and they go, well, what do you say to that? And whatever your argument was, you're suddenly just rendered sort of like you're a cat that's been thrown out the door right quick in the snow, and you've never even seen snow, you've never been out of the house before, and you're suddenly talking about something to do with, let's say, Christianity, and somebody says, well, how about so-and-so? See, one of the benefits of being a card-carrying member, communist, Catholic, or anything, is you can go, and they go, well, what do you say to that? And you go, well, I don't have to say anything. I believe in God. Or I'm a Baptist. I don't have to say anything. And they go, how are you going to explain that? You go, I don't have to explain anything. I'm a Lutheran. How about when these nights, when we really get obscure, if right then I get real simple again and direct, it seems like you've got so far, you think, wait a minute. There must be more to that than that. No, that was it. That's all that's necessary. That's one of the benefits of being a member of anything, to be a follower, which, again, if you need to see it, accounts for the great widespread popularity of this kind of stuff when it's real. Because you can't join and you're not a follower. And so on bad days, you think, well, gee, shit, I get so little out of it anyway. But now I can, wave a card and go, wait a minute, I don't have to answer questions. I'm a member of New Intelligence. I don't have to know anything. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Tory. I don't have to know anything. I don't have to be decent. Part of the benefit of being part of the herd, part of the collective. But you can always go, well, at least I got my family. At least I know who I am. Who am I? Elmer. Where are you when back to the rhetorical question, if not real, then why did I not just say that when the mind is at all upset, out of answers, temporarily off balance, that it will always, as long as you're just sane and ordinary, will revert back to something familiar, certainly not go to anything even more strange, foreign, exotic. It will always revert back and snap back to where it feels comfortable. Why did I not just say that? And I point out that if you, using you generically, if you got anything out of that, or any allegory, but if you got anything out of that, then you had to participate. You had to you just simply had to participate. Now consider what I've been describing metaphorically. So we'll get to symbolic thinking here in a minute. The kind of parallel tracks that you have literal thinking, and then you've got what I was describing as the metaphorical. They do not touch, they do not interfere, the metaphorical, the literal just going. As I said, you can look at it as being that you were dropped down in a theater and you're watching the movie of life and it's the soundtrack running through your head, and there it is, that's the way it should be. Cannot be changed, cannot profitably be altered. Then the metaphorical would be as though you were perhaps suddenly appeared up in a balcony. You can never touch down there, you don't want to. It is like a parallel running. It is like you continually tracking with this metaphorical thinking, which is not literal. It is simply allegory. But you are tracking that, and it does not deny that, because there's nothing to deny. That is that. It is not good, bad, right, wrong. That is it. It is not going to change. It is life doing it. It is not you doing it. Metaphorical thinking is like you tracking it. Now, to ask the rhetorical question, to me doing all the parts, why did I not just say the thing about the mind always reverting back to familiar territory and familiar thought patterns, rather than go through that crap about a cat out in the cold alone suddenly and always reverting to caddies, never Porsches? And I point out, well, if you got anything out, you had to participate. You had to intellectually participate. The thing about metaphorical thinking, what I mean by it, is that you're having to do that continually if you were actually consciously, continually trying to metaphorically track. If you get to where you can do that, then you are having to participate in what you normally do not participate in, which is the literal flow of human thought, which is simply a form of electrical chemical energy, but men think it's something really hot shit. Thinking, well, it's better than. Start to say it's better than being a hippo and laid around in a mud pool all day. But I don't lie to you. I don't know that. Let's don't get into those matters. They're real questionable. Anyway, this is man, as they say. This is man's singularity. It's his gift. If you can do this kind of parallel thinking, you understand, then you are continually, in a sense, participating in the intellectual life of man in a way in which you never have and in a way in which no one else does. You understand? Because you're having to do it to you. And once many of you can already do it. I'm just giving you descriptions since you never had one. That is the pleasure in it. That is the benefit. Is because now life is speaking to you, and it's always been speaking, but now it's speaking and you're participating. Now other people would claim that they're participating, but their participation normally is bitching, criticizing. That is, they think, well, wait a minute, all these people around me, they got the wrong idea. I see things go by on the screen. We're back to the literal thinking, the literal mind down on the floor of the theater. There you are, you're born, there's where you are, not the Garden of Eden, in that theater. And you notice the good guys or what you call the good guys, right across the stream. You know, some Italian Catholics. And you go, boy, go get them. And suddenly right behind them comes some Swiss Protestants. And suddenly 2 or 3 people around you, you hear other people going, hey, now we're getting somewhere. You think, what the hell's wrong with these people? You know, half this theater is mad. They don't even know when to cheer. They cheer for the wrong guys. You're always bitching. That is just part of the energy that keeps the ordinary literal mind alive. But you understand, if you can now, what I intend by my term, think metaphorically, and you're running a parallel, you are now not criticizing, you're not even actually commenting on what's going on down there on the floor, the literal, this screen, or this ticker tape. But it's the audio, if you want to put it. You do understand it's like, it's just continually running. It is the intellectual perception of life. It is the intellectual perception of reality. You're no longer criticizing it. That's what, you cannot do it metaphorically. If you are, you're not metaphorical. You're not thinking metaphorically. But you are now having to participate in that, and you are translating it. That now when it runs across there, no matter if it says, camel going through an eye of a needle, a cat thrown out along the coast, whatever the hell it is, communists fall out of grace in Italy. Whatever it is, you are doing your own translation. You are now participating in the intellectual life of man and yours in a way in which people do not normally do. Then you understand that life itself is speaking in metaphors. It's speaking literally, but that which is taken literally by the literal mind is also a metaphor, which is the humor, I'll try one more time, of would-be public spiritual metaphysical leaders giving literal translations of that which was originally metaphorical. Nobody enjoys that enough. Well, shame on you. Maybe you'll enjoy it between now and next time. But when you can do that yourself, then you understand what metaphor and allegory was originally about, or those who know how to do it, because then you can do your own interpretation. They're running constantly of whatever's going on in life. You no longer argue. You just realize, well, you know, Jesus. It has been a running message. I mean, there it is, and I never understood it. Well, the main thing is, you know, to really get down to it, there's plenty of, you know, when you're trying to think, the main thing is to be sure and do hand gestures like that. Well, that wasn't very familiar. I didn't expect that. Elmer. Calling Elmer Gantry. Come in, Elmer.